Now that I've gotten the warning out of the way, let's get down to it. This wasn't my first encounter with ghosts or the supernatural at my maternal grandparents' house, but I still wasn't expecting it when I moved into her house in the late summer of 2019. My grandma had gotten too ill for nurse aides to care for her, so she ended up back in the nursing home to recover, and her house had been unoccupied for a time. I was needing a space to stay in while waiting for my boyfriend's lease to be up, as we were wanting to move in together, possibly around December. I didn't want to crowd my mom's house, as my younger sister had moved back in with her, let alone have it be the third time I had moved back into my parents' house. So Grandma was nice, and let me move into her house with the promise to maintain the yard and keep pesky kids off her lawn. I do want to give some history about the house. My grandparents, my mom, and her siblings actually pitched in together to build this house over 40 years ago, so it's a young house, so to speak. Another fact is that my grandpa died in that house. He was a brittle diabetic and home alone when he went. So moving in, I figured he might be lingering in the house still. After all, he had visited my younger sister when she had spent the night in the house by herself a couple years ago. Part of me was hoping maybe I would get the chance to talk to him, or even my dad, who passed away in 2016. Boy, was I silly to hope that would be the case when I settled into bed my first night there. We brought my bed and cat over that day, so I was very tired, as it had been just me and my younger sister moving things. I had my bed in my grandpa's bedroom, as my grandma's bedroom had a hospital bed in there to make it easier for her to get in and out of bed, but I didn't feel like trying to move it out of there. I had a lamp on near my bed, so in case I needed to plug in my phone, I wouldn't have such a hassle doing so. My cat was still exploring the space, and my mom had asked me to let her check all the rooms, as my grandma had complained she had a mouse crawling on her one night. I was planning on resting in the bed for a minute before getting back up to unpack some more things so I wouldn't have to worry about it much in the morning. However, a minute turned into a few, and as I was laying there, I thought my cat had come back into the bedroom finally. But I didn't feel small paws climbing up me. It felt like large hands gripping my leg, then moving up my thigh to put pressure on my shoulder and just press me down into the bed, like someone was over top of me, holding me down. I didn't move. I was shocked. The door was locked, back door and front door, so it couldn't be an intruder. My cat had climbed on top of me many times prior, as she normally slept on top of me, so I knew how much weight she had behind those tiny paws of hers. To paint a better picture of the situation, I was lying on my side, with my feet towards the door that led to the hallway of the house, and when I glanced that direction, I didn't see anything there, but I could make out a black mist or cloud hanging over me. As soon as I looked at that, I felt a hot, searing pain in the back of my head, close to where I had my ponytail sitting. It felt like someone was slowly pulling my hair. Not tugging, just pulling. Like they'd been pulling on it for so long the pain was getting worse. I just laid there and held my breath as a more guttural growl could be heard right next to my ear. Hoping my cat would come into the room to distract it. She didn't, and so I gave up and started chanting what I had seen in many videos of ghost encounters. Yeah, quick mention here. I like to watch Ghost Adventures from time to time, or some other Netflix series about ghost stories, and you think I wouldn't have made the stupid mistake of opening myself up to just anything paying me a visit. But I did, and have since learned my lesson. However, reflecting upon it now, I wonder if it didn't follow me from my other apartments. I've moved around a bit, but that story I guess I'll save for another video. So I started chanting, and this may seem typical, but it works. I chanted, "The power of Christ compels you," and repeated it for several minutes to drive it away from me. I heard it screech near the front door, and the sound of the storm door slamming. I got up and hugged my cat, holding her close while I checked the doors to make sure they were locked, and proceeded to leave all the lights in the house. I mean, I'm paying the electric like I promised Grandma I would, and by golly, I did not want the lights on. I was very much scared. Thankfully, my cat stuck by me for the rest of the night, and I was able to sleep because nothing else happened. So that morning, I checked the house after breakfast and found nothing out of the ordinary. But I gave my mom a text explaining what had happened to me last night. At first, she brushed it off as just being a dream, and it did feel like one, but at the same time not. She would circle back on our conversation about it and tell me if something else had happened again to let her know, and she would see about sage and burning it around the house. I also told my aunt about it, and she seemed pretty perplexed by it, as most of the family had heard about my younger sister's experience in the house, and now something was in there that wasn't friendly. She also chalked it up to the house sitting empty for so long that some supernatural thing had tried to take over the space, and now here I am trying to take it back. She hoped, like I did, that it would be the last of it, but I had 2 more experiences. Thankfully, they were less dangerous, but still scary in my book. One afternoon, I was settling into bed to get some sleep before work, as I was working 3rd shift at the time. I heard scratching on the shared wall of the bedroom next to mine. I knew it wasn't my cat, as she was in bed with me, and I got her up after it had stopped and took her into the room to investigate, as I thought it might be the mice. But we checked the room, and the only thing she was interested in was the dual closets. Not because there was any mice in there. It was just a dark, small space for her to climb into. So I gave up and we left the room. Nothing else came of that, thankfully. I figured if I ignored it, it would give up and leave me alone. After all, I had at least banished it from my room, but I don't think I completely kicked it out of the house. The final experience was a few weeks after the scratching. At this point, I wasn't even worried about it, as nothing had happened, and the house was quiet besides me and my cat moving about. I was asleep in bed once more, getting some shut-eye before my shift, and it was about 11 a.m., when in the middle of my sleep cycle, I was woken up by the slamming sound of the dresser drawer. The drawers in my grandma's house have these knocker-like handles that clack loudly whenever they're moved. I checked my grandma's bedroom first, as her dresser has that style of handles, but after finding the dresser untouched, I did a few experimental slams to see if it was the same sound I had heard. It wasn't, so I went to the kitchen as there was another dresser in there. My mom and grandma called it a buffet, but it also had the same type of knockers. I did another experimental slam to see if it was indeed the same sound I had heard. It was. I texted my mother and shakily went back to bed as I needed to sleep before work, but I was still frightened by that. I knew the door was locked and even checked it before going back to the bedroom. My mom came over an hour later and checked on me. I was fine, just sleepy and confused as I had fallen back asleep and was getting woken up yet again. She offered to stay overnight with me to make sure I was okay and didn't experience anything else, and she had already found someone to come over and bless the house to get rid of the entity. She came to the same conclusion as my aunt had about the house sitting empty, so we said a prayer, and while I wish I could have taken her up on her offer to stay the night, she and I worked different hours, and the only other bed she could sleep in was covered in my junk that was waiting to be moved. After that, nothing else seemed to happen. Perhaps there was one night of creaking in the hallway, but I chalked it up to the house and the wind, as it was very windy for several days. November, I moved out of that house into an apartment with my boyfriend, and nothing strange has happened since. I believe we may have driven the entity out, and it was just throwing a tantrum at the end because I wasn't giving it attention. I've not stayed at my grandma's house since. My younger sister is currently living there, and I don't believe she's had any strange experiences. So I believe we're rid of that entity. Hopefully, for forever.